God. In spite of the fact that the world is unraveling at the seams, there still is so much beauty. So much beauty not only in nature, but also in many individuals who reflect your character. Father, this morning we're going to study a very important passage of Scripture. I ask that you will be present with us through the ministry of your Holy Spirit. We want angels to be hovering over this place. We want clarity of thought, and we want willing hearts. And we know that only you can give us both of these. And so thank you, Father, for the promise of your presence. And we know that you will fulfill your promise, because we ask it in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. I'd just like to say that I believe, as we begin our study, that the Godhead contains the key for understanding the proper relationships between men and women on planet Earth. The more I reflect upon the Godhead, the more I am convinced that the Godhead is the model of the relationship that should exist between men and women here upon the earth. In fact, now I'm in the process of writing a book. It's a book that has to do precisely with the Godhead, as well as the relationship that it sustains with human beings and the relationships between men and women in the home as well as in the church. What I want us to do as we begin our study is to read the passage that will be our reflection this morning. That text is 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verses 3 through 12. Now, I would like to mention that this passage was written many years after the cross, because it is said that, yes, male headship was true after the fall, but when Jesus died on the cross, he removed it, and now there's an absolute egalitarian relationship between male and female in the home and in the church. But this passage was written many years after the cross, and we're going to find that God's arrangement had not changed after the cross. I'm going to read from the English Standard Version, which is becoming a very popular version these days, and this is how it reads, and I will interject some statements and explanations as we go along. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ. The head of a wife, now some versions translates the head of a woman, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. So the question is there a chain of command? Yes. There is a chain of command. Jesus has a head. The man has a head, and the woman or the wife also has a head. The only individual in this arrangement that has no head is God the Father, because he's the absolute head. There's no head above that head. And the only individual that is no one's head is the woman. Now, don't be offended at me. Be offended at Paul, if anyone. No, don't be offended at Paul, because he was inspired by God's Holy Spirit. But this is the chain of command that God established. Notice that Paul doesn't say that the head of every man was Christ, and the head of Christ was the Father, and the head of the woman was the man. No, he says is, now, when he's writing. Now, it continues saying, every man who prays, is this taking place in church? Is this an ecclesiastical meeting? Yes, it is. Every man who prays or prophesies with his, and you've noticed I've added in brackets what? The word physical. That's an explanation. It's not in the text. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered Is that talking about his literal physical head? Yes, talking about his physical head. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. Now, does that mean that he dishonors his physical head? No, what does it mean? He dishonors his head, who is Christ. Are you with me or not? Now, let's continue reading. Continue saying, every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. But every wife or woman who prays or prophesies with her head, is that her physical head? Yes. With her physical head uncovered, dishonors her head. Does she dishonor her physical head by having her head uncovered? No. Who is she dishonoring? The man who is her head. So far, so good? Are we clear? Now, notice what it continues saying. Once again, every man who prays or prophesies with his physical head covered dishonors his head, which is Christ. But every wife or woman who prays or prophesies with her physical head uncovered dishonors her head, who is the man or the husband. It said, it is the same as if her head were shaven, if she doesn't wear the covering. For if a wife or a woman will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or to shave her head, let her cover her head. For a man ought not to cover his head. Now here comes something very interesting. And we're going to amplify and study this carefully. It says, for a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. That's the reason why he should not cover his head. He's the image and glory of God. But the woman, and it's understood that she should have her head covered. Why? Because she is the glory of man. Now, what do you find strange here? It says that the man is the image and glory of God, but it only says that the woman is the glory of man. What about the image aspect? Isn't the woman in the image of God? We're going to take a look at that. You might think, well, Paul forgot to put it in there. I don't think so. There's a theological reason. So once again, it says, for a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man. Now, notice the rationale that Paul is using. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Is that in God's pre-creation order? Pre-sin order? Yes. It goes back to God's plan before sin. And so he says, for man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. Is that a pre-fall reason also? Absolutely. We have to be honest to the text. Then it says, that is why a wife or a woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head. A symbol of whose authority? According to the context of the man's authority over the woman. Yes. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head. And then you have this interesting phrase, because of the angels. We're going to take a look at that. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, or man of woman. For as woman was made from man, so man is now born of woman. And all things ultimately are from God. Now we'll be taking a look at 2 or 3 verses after this passage a little bit later in our study. Now let's ask some questions. We've answered some of them already, but let's go back and review some questions that we're going to ask about this passage. First question, what did Paul mean when he wrote that the man who covers his head dishonors his head? Whose head does he dishonor? His own or Christ's? Christ's. You got one out of one. Question number 2. When a woman fails to cover her head in public worship, whose head does she dishonor? Her husband's or her own? Her husband's, yes. Next question. Why did Paul say that it is a dishonor to the man for the woman to worship with her head uncovered? Why did the Apostle Paul say that? We're going to take a look and answer all of these questions. Next question. Why did Paul say that it is a dishonor for the man to worship with his head covered? The next question we already answered. Are Paul's arguments for female submission based on the fall or culture, or are they based on the creation order? They're based on the creation order, folks, before sin. The next question, why does Paul state that the man is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man? Doesn't Genesis 1:26 and 27 clearly teach that the woman was created in the image of God as well as the man? So why does it simply say the man is in the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man? Why doesn't it mention that the woman is the image of God as well? There's a theological reason. By the way, she is in the image of God. She's fully equal to the man. Last question. What did Paul mean when he wrote that the woman must wear a veil as a sign of submission to the man because of the angels? Now let's review Paul's basic argument as we begin our study. His basic argument is founded on verse 3. That is the key verse of the whole passage, verse 3, because it gives us the order. I like to call it the chain of command. You know, one thing that those who favor women's ordination don't like, they say, if you believe that the woman is subject to the authority of the man, then you have a hierarchical view. They don't like the word hierarchy. And they don't like the word head when it refers to the husband or refers to the leader in the church. They don't like the word submission. All these words that are disliked in the contemporary world, you know, I'm not going to let anybody tell me what to do. I'm not going to be in submission to anyone. I'm going to be the head. You know, that's the sinful way of thinking that we confront in this world. Now, what is the synthesis of what the Apostle Paul is saying? He's saying this: God is the head of Christ. Is that a bad thing? No. Let me just interject something here. Is your head good or bad? Dr. Nedley would be have much more authority than me in explaining the importance of the head. Does the head give commands to the body? Yes. Of course it does. It coordinates all of the actions of the body, ultimately. Does it do it for the body's evil or for the body's good? It's for the body's good. The head is good. But should the body be subject to the head? Oh, that's a bad thing. The body should say, hey, you're not going to tell me what to do. Are you with me? The head is good. It's not bad. You know, to say that the man is the head in the home and that the male is supposed to be a head under the great head, Jesus Christ, in the church, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. As long as the head operates the way Christ operates. So this is the gist of the argument. God is the head of Christ. Christ is the head of the man. Is that a bad thing? And man is the head of the woman. That's a bad thing. Let's be consistent. If it's not a bad thing for God to be the head of Christ, and it's not a bad thing for Christ to be the head of the man, it certainly is not a bad thing for the man to be the head of the woman. That's just simple reading of the text without trying to twist it to make it fit an agenda that we might have. Now the Apostle Paul continues arguing, if a man covers his head in public worship, he is dishonoring Christ, who is his head. And if the woman uncovers her head in public worship, she is dishonoring the man who is her head. Is that point clear? It's foundational. This is talking about worship in church. This is in an ecclesiastical setting. It's not in a household setting. It is in a church setting. This is very important. The Apostle Paul is saying that the man is the head in an ecclesiastical setting, not only in the home. Now let's talk about the purpose of the veil. In the culture of Paul's day, the woman who uncovered her head in public worship was sending mixed signals, because people would get the impression that there were two heads, not one. Because if both of them had their head uncovered, you would have full egalitarianism, which the Apostle Paul says is not God's plan in this passage. But when the head of the man alone was uncovered, it was clear to the worshipers that he was the head in the man-woman relationship in the home and in a congregational worship setting. Though his remarks would go over today like a lead balloon, in this feminist society that we live in, Albert Barnes, Bible commentator from long ago, and I'll mention again, I love the old Bible commentators because they actually comment on the Bible. The new Bible commentators, all they do is add 150 footnotes of what the other scholars said about the text. Study the Bible for yourself. And then, I'm not saying don't consult the commentaries. After you've studied the text for yourself, then go see if you can glean some gem from someone else. But don't go to someone else first. That's like eating meat. It's better to go to the source that the cow ate. See? And in the Bible study, don't go to the secondary source, go to the primary source. Notice what Albert Barnes had to say. The sense is, he's talking about this text, she is subordinate to him. And in all circumstances, in her demeanor, her dress, her conversation, in public, and in the family circle, should recognize her subordination to him. Remember when the wedding vows used to say, obey? Yeah. That was a long time ago. Some of the old timers will remember that. We've, of course, taken that out. It continues saying, to remove that, in other words, to remove the veil, is to remove the appropriate mark of such subordination, and is a public act by which she thus shows dishonor to the man. He would be crucified for saying that today. May he rest in peace. Now let's talk a little bit about the image and glory aspect. How do we explain the Apostle Paul's affirmation that the man is in the image and glory of God, while the woman is described simply as the glory of man? Isn't the woman ultimately the glory of God too? Isn't the woman in the image of God as well? Yes, but in a different way than Adam. We're going to notice. Now, certainly this sounds like a sexist remark by today's politically correct standards. But who is to say that what is considered proper in today's society is proper in God's sight? As we shall see, Paul's foundational argument is not based on the culture of his day, but it is based on the creation order. So we don't go by what the newspapers say or but what society says. We go by what God says in his holy word through the inspired Apostle Paul, who is interpreting what is found in Genesis before the fall. Now the question is, weren't both man and woman created in the image of God? Indeed. The creation account is too clear to be misunderstood. But now notice, the Genesis story also reveals that the woman derived the image of God how? Through the mediation of the man. This fact can be clearly discerned by comparing Genesis 1:26 and 27 with Genesis chapter 2 and verses 18 through 24. Remember we studied that? You remember? Genesis 1:26 provides us with the summary statement that God intended to create man, that is, both male and female in his image. You remember that we mentioned that in Genesis 1:26, let us make man, the word man doesn't have the definite article. It's speaking generically, because then it says, male and female. So he used the generic word because he's going to create male and female. But let me ask you, does Genesis 2 explain the process and the order in which God did this? Absolutely. Genesis 1:27 and chapter 2 verses 18 to 24 then explain the process that God followed when he made male and female in his image. The argument is not difficult to understand, folks. God created the man in his image, and the woman was created from the man, and therefore she derives the image of God through the man. You follow me? And you might say, well, I don't like to get the image of God through the man. I'm sorry. That's the way God chose to do it. Now I want to read from another commentary, Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown's commentary, another old commentary, where the commentators explain this phrase concerning the image of God. This is what it says. Man, image and glory of God, being created in God's image first and directly. The woman subsequently and indirectly through man's mediation. Are you understanding that statement? The commentators caught what it means. Thus God mediated his image in woman through the man. This is one reason why Adam stated, "This is now flesh of my flesh and bone of my bones." It does not say that the woman said, "He is now flesh of my flesh and bone of my bones." She derived her flesh from Adam, and thus the image of God was in her through the mediation of Adam. That's the argument. Is this clear? Let me read you another statement from Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown, where they continue the argument. And by the way, this would just totally not be tolerated in the world today. It would not be tolerated by many people within the Seventh-day Adventist Church who are pushing for women's ordination. They say these guys were crazy. Notice what it says. The woman is created in the image of God as well as the man. But as the moon in relation to the sun, so the woman shines not so much with the light direct from God as with light derived from man in her order in creation, though in grace she comes into direct communion with God. Even here, much of her knowledge is immediately given her through man, on whom she is dependent. Ministry to man, whom she elevates in his more responsible position, is her glory. You notice he mentions the sun and the moon? Let's just take a look at that analogy for a minute. Where does the light of the moon come from? From the sun. So whom does the moon glorify? The sun. Where did woman get her glory from? From the man. So she's the glory of man. Are you with me or not? The argument is, do you think the moon says, hey, I want my own glory. I don't want the sun, I want my own glory. You know, we have rights in this world, don't we? No. Is the moon perfectly, and I know that the moon doesn't think and doesn't know, but is the moon okay with the idea of reflecting the glory of the sun? Yeah. Ultimately, the glory of the moon is the glory of the sun. It glorifies the sun. Are you understanding me? Now let's talk about the glory of man, the next section. And why is the woman called the glory of the man? The answer is not difficult to find. Man is the glory of God because God created him first directly. The woman is the glory of man because she was taken from the man. Woman is called the glory of man because she was created from and for her husband, as Paul explicitly states, to give him honor, glory, and respect. And now we come to a crucially important point in this study. And why is the woman, oh, excuse me, I got to go to the bottom of the page here. Thus the woman, this the next to last paragraph, at least in what I'm looking at, the next to last paragraph. Thus the woman is to stand in her relationship to the man, such as Jesus stands in relationship to his Father. He lives to give honor and glory to his Father and never to himself. In fact, the Apostle Paul refers to Jesus as the radiance of God's glory. And we're told in Hebrews 1 verse, in 2 Corinthians 4 verse 6, that Jesus, the glory of God, is seen in the face of Jesus. And in John 1 and verse 14 and verse 18 it says, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So Jesus lives to bring glory to his Father. And the reflection of that is that the woman is to bring glory to the one that brought her into existence. That is in a derived sense. Now, Ellen White provides a profound insight on this matter. She explains that when Lucifer questioned the position of Jesus, the Father called the heavenly council together to explain his Son's true position. It is worthy of note that Jesus did not speak up to defend himself, but rather exalted the Father's glory. Was this after the world was created or before? Before. Did the Son glorify the Father even before sin came into this world? Yes, it did. Yes, he did. Notice this statement from Ellen White, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 36. But in this, he, that is Jesus, would not seek power or exaltation for himself, contrary to God's plan, but would exalt what? The Father's glory and execute his purposes of beneficence and love. For whose glory does Jesus live? Does Jesus ever say, well, I've got my own dignity, I got my glory too? Never. But that's the attitude that is being manifested these days. I can occupy that position. Why not? At each and every stage of the life of Jesus, past, present, and future, Jesus has lived to bring glory and honor to his Father. He has never sought position, rank, or power. His motto has ever been, he who has seen me has seen the Father. The relationship between Adam and Eve was to be a reflection of this. The noted commentator Albert Barnes expressed it this way: Eve was made for him. She was made after he was. She was taken from him, and was bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh. All her comeliness, loveliness, and purity are therefore an expression of His honor and dignity, since all that comeliness and loveliness were made of Him and for Him. And once again, our sinful minds don't like this way of thinking, because we live in a world where everybody wants to claim their rights, and people don't want to fulfill their responsibilities. Rights without responsibilities. So it was to be with Eve. In fact, Ellen White refers to Eve as Adam's second self. Listen to this statement, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 46. A part of man, bone of his bone, and flesh of his flesh, she was his second self, showing the close union and the affectionate attachment that should exist in this relation. That's why Jesus said, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." Jesus is the second self of the Father. But Jesus has no problems being second fiddle. No problems with it. He has no problems exalting the Father's glory. He has no problem implementing the Father's commands and the Father's will. Because the order of heaven is that subjection is divine and exaltation is diabolical. Now let's talk about because of the angels. This is where things are going to get exciting. What did Paul mean when he wrote that the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels? Whose authority is Paul referring to? Is the veil a symbol of her authority over the man, or is it a sign of the man's authority over her? Well, I think the context has the answer. It indicates that the veil on her head is a sign of what? Of the man's authority, because that is the central point that Paul has been trying to get across in this passage. Now I want to read another comment by Barnes. And this is a comment about because of the angels. He says, "I do not know what it means. And I regard it as one of the very few passages in the Bible whose meaning as yet is wholly inexplicable." But what Albert Barnes didn't know, Ellen White did. It bears noting that whenever the preposition dia, that is because of, appears in the New Testament in the accusative case, now I'm not going to get into Greek grammar, but it appears that way here. It always denotes a causal relationship. Paul is saying that the woman should wear the veil as a sign of submission to the authority of the man because of three reasons. He gives three reasons. First, man did not come from woman, but woman from man. Second, man was not created for woman, but the woman was created for man. And the third reason is because of the angels. Now, I like the way the NIV expressed it. You know, the NIV is not liked by many. I'm a King James man myself. I like the King James. I believe that listen carefully, that the manuscripts that were used for the King James are the best manuscripts. But I don't believe that the King James translation is always the better translation. Is there a distinction? Yes, there is a distinction. The fact is, folks, that when it comes to the state of the dead, the NIV helps Adventists much more than the King James. I'll give you one example, and I'm just digressing now because I'm going to read from the NIV, and there are those who are going to say, Pastor Bohr is apostate because he uses one verse from the NIV. I've had people write to me. You wouldn't believe it. I have a whole folder full about this thick of King James only material that people have sent me. And I have several pamphlets that rebuke me for using the New King James. And you know, I receive them. I say, okay, I know where you're coming from. I'm not endorsing the NIV or the ESV. What I'm saying is that sometimes those versions have a better translation of the Greek text. You know, let me give you an example of a text on the state of the dead. The King James reads in Acts chapter 2, you will not leave my soul in hell, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. Speaking about Jesus. That's taken by churches to say that Jesus went to hell when he died. His soul went to hell. You will not leave my soul in hell. The NIV translates it, you will not leave me in the grave. Which is the better translation? The NIV. Hands down. So let's be practical. You know, let's not throw out the baby with the proverbial bathwater. You know, it's good to compare many different versions. You don't even have to know Greek or Hebrew these days. You can get resources, you can get software where you don't even have to know the original languages. It's amazing. This is how the NIV, having made that explanation, reads. For man did not come from woman, but woman from man. That's reason number one, right? Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. That's reason number two. For this reason, notice, for these two reasons that have just been mentioned, and because of the angels, the woman ought to have a sign of authority on her head. How many reasons? Three. Two of them, listen carefully, two of them have to do with an arrangement that took place at creation. But the third reason takes us beyond creation to something that happened in heaven. I want to read a statement here from this book that just came out recently. Riddled with error. Published by Pacific Press. Published at a very strategic moment. Shortly before annual council. Questions and answers about women's ordination. It's actually prepared by two individuals, Martin Hanna, who is the teacher and co-editor of Adventist University Seminary Studies, and Cindy Tush, who for some time was with the White Estate, and I think presently she's retired. I'd just like to read a few things from this book. You might say, well, why are you mentioning these names? Well, have to. I'm reading from the book. Right? You know, my name has been personally used in many sites, even on Spectrum. Not in a positive sense. And I'm okay with it. When you're out in the public sector, you have to be open for criticism. And that's okay. But I want them to answer their criticism with Scripture. Amen. If they don't answer with Scripture, it doesn't make any difference to me. I sleep well. This is what it says. The question is, it's a question and answer format. Doesn't there have to be the subordination in the human family at creation and in ministry if they are made in the image of the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? The answer is no. Some have suggested that Jesus holds a subordinate role to the Father within the Trinity, and that therefore subordination and hierarchy must have been part of God's original plan of humankind as the image of God. Of humankind as the image of God. And now notice what they say. It is true that during Jesus' time on earth, we see him submitting himself to the will of the Father, as in his prayer in Gethsemane. However, it is faulty to use the incarnation as a pattern for the eternal relationships in the Trinity during of the Trinity, period. During his time on earth, Jesus was subject to human limitations and surrounded by human temptation. Having limited himself for his mission, he would have to rely fully on his Father and trust the Father's leading. At the same time, this obedience does not give any indication of inequality in their eternal relationship. Continue saying, the Bible presents the persons in the Godhead as sharing mutual authority and mutual submission among themselves. You never find the Father submitting to the Son. Show me one verse in the Bible that says that there's mutual submission in the Godhead. There is no such thing. The Bible presents the persons in the Godhead as sharing mutual authority and mutual submission among themselves. Then I'm going to skip a little portion here because this isn't the main point I want to make. They give the impression that those who say that the Son is subject to the Father before his incarnation, they believe that Jesus is a lesser God. This is what they say. The proposal of lesser gods in the Trinity resembles polytheism, while the Bible emphasizes the oneness of God. So we've just been called polytheists if we believe that the Son is subject to the authority of the Father before his incarnation. This is in direct violation of what Ellen White says multiple times in her writings. And now we're going to get into that. This was just an introduction to what Ellen White has to say about it. Now let's go back to our material. Paul's reasoning is that the headship-submission relationship that God originally established between man and woman at creation was intended to serve as an object lesson to the angels. That is to say, the angels were to see on earth a small-scale model or reflection of the eternal relationship of the Father to the Son in the Godhead. Are you understanding this point? This is the reason why God the Father said to his Son, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." It doesn't mean that Adam was only individually made in the image of God, or that Eve was made only individually in the image of God. It means that the relationship between Adam and Eve was to be a reflection of the relationship between the Father and the Son, with the Father being the head and Christ being subject to the head. 1 Corinthians 11:3. That's a plain reading of Scripture and the spirit of prophecy. Adam and Eve were not merely made in the image of God individually. Rather, their relationship was a reflection of the relationship between the Father and the Son in the Godhead. Now let's look at some interesting parallels. And by the way, in the book I'm writing, I have multiple statements from the spirit of prophecy, additional Bible texts. This is only a synthesis of the parallel between the Father and the Son and Adam and Eve. Let me ask you, is Jesus a distinct personality from the Father? Yes. Are they two individuals? Yes. Yes, they are two individuals. And yet, let me ask you, in another sense, are the Father and the Son one? Yes. Jesus said it. I and my Father are one. And yet they are two. Ellen White says in Youth Instructor, December 16, 1897, I don't know if that's in your syllabus or not. She says, from eternity, there was a complete unity between the Father and the Son. Is that the ideal for a husband and a wife? Is that the ideal for husband and wife? Husbands? Yes. How about wives? Yes. Oh, my lands. And you just had breakfast. I can't believe it. Is that intimate relationship between the Father and the Son to be reflected in the relationship between the husband and the wife? Yes. Yes, that's a little bit better. From eternity, there was a complete unity between the Father and the Son. Now listen carefully. They were two, yet little short of being identical. They were not identical. They were literal. They were what? They were a little short of being identical. Two in individuality, yet one in spirit and heart and character. Was that to be reflected in the relationship between husband and wife? Yes, absolutely. Another interesting detail concerning the Godhead is that the Son in eternity was in the bosom of the Father. Does the Bible say that? John 1 verse 18 says the Son who is in the bosom of the Father has made God the Father known. So Jesus is from the bosom of his Father. Let me ask you, is Jesus the express image of his Father's person? That's what Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3 says. He is the express image of the Father's person. Now listen carefully to what I'm going to say. In the New Testament, you have texts that say that we are in the image of God. The word that is used there is the word icon, where we get the word icon from. Whenever it refers to human beings, the word icon is used in Greek. But in Hebrews 1 verse 3, the only time in the New Testament that this word appears, when it refers to Jesus as the image of God, it's the word character. What word do we get from character? Character. That means the express image. We are not the express image. We are in the image. Jesus alone is in the express image of the Father. Let me ask you, is the Son ontologically equal to his Father? Is he a lesser God? No. As a being, is he equal to his Father? Yes, he is. Is he co-substantial with his Father? Is he composed of the same stuff as his Father? Yes. Is he subject to his Father's authority? Now, wait a minute. How can he be equal to his Father if he's subject to his Father's authority? Are you with me? And let me ask you, to whom does Jesus render honor and glory? To his Father. Now let's go and talk about the relationship between Adam and Eve. Were they distinct personalities? Two distinct persons? Mm-hmm. Yet were they one? They are no longer two, but one. Was Eve taken out of Adam's bosom? Interesting. Did Eve derive the image of God through Adam? Was she in the image of Adam, ultimately in the image of God? Yes. Was she as a being equal to Adam? Or was she a lesser order of humanity, to use the expression that was used by this administrator of a conference here in the United States, in the western United States? Is Jesus equal to his Father? Yes, they are equal. Was Eve co-substantial? Was Eve co-substantial with Adam? Was she composed of the same stuff? Yes. Was she subject to Adam's authority? We studied that last night. And whose glory was she? She was Adam's glory. Are you seeing the parallel? God intended, folks, that the relationship between the man and the woman be a reflection on earth of a much larger reality in heaven. The relationship between the Father and the Son is the model for what God intended for the relationship between male and female on earth. But now the question immediately, we're going to the next section, the big question. But the question that immediately suggests itself is this: why was it necessary for God to make a small-scale model on earth of his relationship to his Son in heaven? Are you understanding the question? Why would the angels need such a revelation? The answer is clearly revealed in the spirit of prophecy. You're going to see that Paul not only takes us to the point of creation for relationship between man and woman, he takes us way back to heaven. Before sin came into this world, before this world was created. It is crucial to remember that the original complaint of Lucifer against God in heaven was related to functional roles. Lucifer was jealous of what? Christ's position, and argued in favor of an egalitarian arrangement in the heavenly order. Ellen White explains what led to Lucifer's jealousy. It was that God was going to create man, male and female. That's what led to the original controversy. God was going to make a reflection on earth of his relationship to his Son in heaven. It says there in early writings, page 145, but when God said to his Son, "Let us make man in our image," Satan was jealous of Jesus. He wished to be consulted concerning the formation of man. And because he was not, he was filled with envy, jealousy, and hatred. He desired to receive the highest honors in heaven next to God. And those honors belong to whom? They belong to Jesus. Now in Genesis 1, 26 to 28, as I mentioned in our first study, there is an unusual fluctuation between singular and plural nouns and pronouns in these verses. The evidence indicates that there is a plurality in unity in the Godhead, and there is a plurality and unity in man. Let's review. Then God, who is this? God the Father, said to whom? To his Son. Let us, that's Father and Son, right? Make man, generic use because it includes male and female. Let us make man in what? Remember, man includes both what? Male and female. So when it says let us make man, it's talking about the relationship between male and female. So they say, let us make man in what? In our image, according to our likeness. Is the relationship between Adam and Eve a reflection of the relationship between the Father and the Son? Clearly, Genesis 1:26 says so. And then it says, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Were Adam and Eve both given dominion? So that means that that both of them are heads. No. Let me ask you, does God the Father and God the Son, do they both have dominion? Sure. But who is the head of Christ? The Father. Jesus, by the way, sits at the right hand of God. He is a co-regent, but the co-regent is never in the same position as the king or the sovereign in terms of function. Are you with me or not? Ellen White clearly says that Jesus was next in authority to the Father. Now, what part of next in authority don't you understand? He had authority. It's like when the seventh trumpet blows. It says the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of God and of His Christ. His Christ. Possessive pronoun. But the Father is the ultimate authority. That does not make Jesus inferior, but it means that Jesus is subject to His Father. And that's a bad thing, right? That's what they're making it appear like. Bad. Submission is bad. All of us need to be able to occupy the same position at the top. Now, in verse 26, God is saying what He wants to do. He's speaking to His Son. In verse 27, they actually do it. So God, who is that? The Father, created the man. It has the definite article. Who's it referring to? Adam. He created the man. And this is non-generic. In his image. Now, wait a minute. Didn't they just say, let us create man in our image? Now he's saying, in his image. His. One or two? One. Let us create man, it says here, so God created the man in his own image. In the image of God, who is that? The Father. He, who? The Father, created him. One or two? One. And then it goes on to clarify. It says, male and female, he created them. But what does he do first? He creates the man first. And then he creates what? The woman, according to chapter 2. And then it says, then God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Now, the spirit of prophecy evidence indicates that Lucifer, listen carefully now, that Lucifer and the higher ranking angels knew that Jesus was the Son of God. They knew that Lucifer was not equal to Jesus. And I'm going to read a statement where it makes it clear. But they attempted to deceive the angels into thinking that Jesus was a created being on the same level as Lucifer. Confrontation, page 29. Satan was well acquainted with the position of honor of Christ that Christ had held in heaven as what? As the Son of God, the beloved of the Father. You know what's being said today? It's being said, well, Jesus became the Son at his incarnation. It's true that Jesus became the Son at his incarnation in a different sense. But both Scripture and the Spirit of prophecy tells us that Jesus was a Son before he came to this world. He was a Son in eternity. Did you notice this? Satan was well acquainted with the position of honor Christ had held in heaven as the Son of God, the beloved of the Father. Was there such a thing as Father and Son in heaven before sin? Yes. And I have many more statements that I could read. This Day with God, page 128. Listen what the angels wanted to hide. The fact that the fallen, I put the word fallen there because it's clearly in the context what it's talking about. The fact that the angels wanted would obscure. This fact the angels would obscure. What did they want to obscure so it wouldn't be understood? That Christ was the only begotten Son of God. And they came to consider that they were not to consult Christ. Did the highest angels, along with Lucifer, know that Jesus was the Son of God? You better believe they did. Did they want to hide that idea from the rest of the angelic hosts? Yes. Now listen carefully. At this point, Jesus was subject to the Father's will as Michael the archangel. You say, is there any scripture for that? Yes, there is. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels. Hello, this is before the creation of the world. Before Satan was cast out of heaven, Jesus was already Michael. In fact, Ellen White says that Jesus had been installed by the Father to command the angelic hosts. His Father put him in that position. I would say that's an exercise of authority, of supreme authority. At this point, Jesus was subject to his Father's will as Michael the archangel and had been installed by the Father to command the heavenly hosts. We are told, Review and Herald, December 17, 1862, the Son of God was next in authority to the great lawgiver. 3 Spiritual Gifts, page 36, it says Jesus was the commander of all heaven. And now listen carefully. He imparted to the angelic family the high commands of his Father. Was Jesus subject to his Father? There's no other way of understanding this unless you want to twist it. I'm aggravated by this book because people will read it. People these days don't study. I'm speaking generally. You know, they are totally, they have a numb frontal lobe. And that's because of what Dr. Nedley was saying yesterday. It's because they've allowed the television to convert them into zombies. Spiritual zombies. You know, and they say, well, you know, you need to have exciting stuff for the kids in church. You know why? Because their minds are so saturated with the stuff that they get during the week that they come to church and say, boring. So what do? We give them more exciting stuff in church. Or do we teach them that they need to cleanse their frontal lobe and start thinking for a change and studying the Bible for themselves? You know, there's nothing that will, like Randy Skeet was saying, there's nothing that will make your intellect become strong, such as the study of Scripture. It has more wisdom than all the books that have ever been written in the world. Jesus was the commander of all heaven. He imparted to the angelic family the high commands of his Father. So the Father didn't communicate directly with the angels. He communicated through whom? Through Jesus. Confrontation, page 45. He who could influence the angels against their supreme ruler and against his Son. How many supreme rulers are there? Are the Son and the Father both supreme rulers? No. He who could influence the angels of God against their supreme ruler and against his Son, their loved commander, and enlist their sympathy for himself, was capable of any deception. So what was Lucifer saying? Lucifer was saying, listen, God the Father, okay, he's sitting on his throne, he's the supreme ruler. But Jesus, he's the commander of the angelic host. He's not on an equal level. He's a created being, like me. So why does the Father favor him and not me? Are you with me? He's trying to hide that Jesus is the eternal Son of God so that he can ascend. Now let's continue here. Is this exciting stuff? It's amazing. Lucifer wanted the angels to think that it was unfair for the Father to consult Jesus as one equal with himself when Jesus was subject to the Father's will as the commander of the angelic host. How can he be equal to the Father if he's the commander? He was installed by the Father as the commander of the angelic host and is under the authority of the Father. How can he be equal? Are you understanding me? When Lucifer aspired to ascend to the position of Jesus, the Father called a meeting of the angels to confer special honor upon his Son and to explain their relationship. He stated that although he and his Son were equal, his Son was subject to his will. Are you on the same page with me now? This women's ordination thing hits at the very heart of the Godhead. This is the point that has been missed and that is trying to be hidden from view. This is how the Spirit of prophecy describes it. The great Creator assembled the heavenly host, and now he's going to talk directly to them. You know, he always shared his commands through Jesus. Now he gets the angels together and says, now I got something to say to you. That he might, in the presence of all the angels, confer special honor upon his Son. Did Jesus become only the Son when he became incarnate? No. The Son was seated on the throne with the Father. So they were both seated on the throne, right? So did they both have dominion, Father and Son? Yeah, so that means that the Father wasn't the head. Both were heads. The Father and the Son were heads. That's not what 1 Corinthians 11:3 says. The Son was seated on the throne with the Father, and the heavenly throng of holy angels was gathered around them. The Father then made known that it was ordained by himself that Christ, his Son, should be equal with himself. Who ordained it? The Father. So that wherever was the presence of his Son, it was his own presence. The word of the Son was to be obeyed as readily as the word of the Father. Now listen carefully. His Son, he had invested with authority. Who invests who? The Father, the Son. Does the Father have supreme authority then? Yes. His Son, he had invested with authority to command the heavenly host. Especially was his Son to work in union with himself. Remember, let us make man? In the anticipated creation of the earth, in every living thing that should exist upon the earth, his Son would carry out his will. Whose will? His Father's will. And his purposes. Whose purposes? The Father's purposes. But would do nothing of himself alone. So, for the first time in history, in the history of Jesus, Jesus, for the first time in all of his life, when he was on earth, he says, I can of myself do nothing. He never said that before. He said it in heaven. Even in heaven, he says, I cannot do anything of my own. My Father. The glory is for him. So it says, his Son would carry out his Father's will and his purposes, but would do nothing of himself alone. The Father's will would be fulfilled in him. Would anybody dare say that Jesus was not subject to the Father's authority in eternity past? It is a denial of the spirit of prophecy. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 36. The King of the universe. Are Jesus and his Father both kings? No. The King of the universe summoned the heavenly host before him, that in their presence he might set forth the true position of his Son and show the relation he sustained to all created beings. The Son of God shared the Father's throne, but the Father is the King of the universe, right? The Son of God shared the Father's throne, and the glory of the eternal self-existent one encircled both. Before the assembled inhabitants of heaven, the King declared that none but Christ, the only begotten of God, could fully enter into his purposes. And to him it was committed to execute the mighty counsels of his will. Of whose will? The Father's will. The Son of God had wrought the... Now listen carefully. Was Jesus under the authority of the Father even when the angels were created? Listen carefully. The Son of God had wrought the Father's will in the creation of all the hosts of heaven. And to him, as well as to God, their homage and allegiance were due. Christ was still to exercise divine power in the creation of the earth and its inhabitants. But in all this, he would not seek power or exaltation for himself, contrary to God's plan, but would exalt the Father's glory and execute his purposes of beneficence and love. We are looking at this microscopically. Lucifer did not like this meeting where the Father exalted his Son and honored his Son in the presence of all of the angels and explained his position. Notice Patriarchs and Prophets, pages 37 to 39. Patriarchs and Prophets, 37 to 39. The exaltation of the Son of God as equal. As what? Equal. But he was subject to his Father. How can he be equal? Are male and female equal? Is female subject to male? So if she's subject, why, how can they be equal? Are you understanding the dilemma that these people put us in? It's a false dilemma. The exaltation of the Son of God as equal with the Father was represented as an injustice to Lucifer. It was claimed was also entitled to reverence and honor. Now listen to this. There had been no change in the position or authority of Christ. In other words, does Jesus take his position when the Father announces that the position of Jesus? No, there hadn't been any change. It had been like that before. There had been no change in the position or authority of Christ. Lucifer's envy and misrepresentation and his claims to equality with Christ had made necessary a statement of the true position of the Son of God. But this position had been the same from the beginning. Many of the angels were, however, blinded by Lucifer's deceptions. His claims to egalitarianism. Although they had heretofore been in perfect harmony with the order that God had established, they were now discontented and unhappy because they could not penetrate his unsearchable counsels and were dissatisfied with his purpose in exalting Christ. These stood ready to second Lucifer's demand for equal authority with the Son of God. Does that have anything to say about the controversy that's going on now? But angels who were loyal and true maintained the wisdom and justice of the divine decree and endeavored to reconcile this disaffected being with the will of God. Now listen to this. Christ was the Son of God. At this point, was Christ already the Son of God? Yep. He's the eternal Son of God. Christ was the Son of God. He had been one with him before the angels were called into existence. He had ever stood at the right hand of the Father. His supremacy, so full of blessing to all who came under its benignant control, had not heretofore been questioned. Now, let's go to the earthly level. Why did God establish the relationship between man and woman with the man being the head and the woman being subject to the authority of the man? Because the angels were to understand through a small-scale model the relationship between the Father and Son in heaven. Let's continue. In order to illustrate on a smaller scale the relationship between the Father and the Son, God then created Adam and Eve in his image to illustrate on a smaller stage the ontological equality and functional differences within the Godhead. Are you understanding that point? Thus, the submission of the woman to the man was an object lesson to the angels of the submission of the Son to the Father. We are not comparing apples and oranges here. In 1 Corinthians 11, the Apostle Paul is appealing to the creation story for his argument. The allusions to creation are numerous. Paul refers to the creation of male and female. He refers to God's image. He underlines that Eve came from Adam. She was made for him and therefore was subject to his authority. He even appeals to the woman's long hair, which was given to her by nature at creation. Have you noticed that most women have long hair and men have short hair? Well, what does that have to do with creation? The Apostle Paul is appealing to creation for that arrangement. And he seems to hint that really, if the woman doesn't wear a veil, her long hair would be her veil. Are you with me? Now let's summarize. Don't get aggravated at me, women who have short hair. You must argue with Paul. Now let's summarize. And I have it here succinctly summarized. The head of Christ is? Come on, help me. The Father. The head of the man is? Christ. The head of the woman is? Man. The wife should wear a veil or have long hair where? In public worship. The veil or long hair is a sign of what? Of submission to the authority of the husband or of the man. If the wife participates in public worship without a veil on her head or her head shaved, she dishonors whom? Her husband or the man who is her head. The man is the image and glory of God, and the woman is what? The glory of the man. The man is the image of God directly, and the woman is the image of God through the mediation of the man. Man did not come from woman, but woman came from man. Neither was man created for woman, but rather woman for man. And finally, the ontological equality, that is, as beings, of man and woman, and the functional submission of the woman to the man is an object lesson to the angels about the ontological equality of the Father and the Son, and the functional submission of the Son to the Father. Let me ask you, does God use earthly miniature things to explain heavenly things? Yes. Have you ever heard of the sanctuary? Why did God have an earthly sanctuary, a miniature sanctuary built on earth? Because He wanted us to understand the greater reality in heaven. And in the same way, God wanted the angels, and by the way, us human beings, to understand through the relationship between the man and the woman, the husband and the wife, the relationship that exists between the Father and the Son in the Godhead. So to strike at these roles is to strike at the very heart of the Godhead. This is serious stuff. By the way, this was to be applied in all of the churches. This wasn't just one church in Corinth that Paul is talking about. Notice 1 Corinthians 11, verses 13 through 16. Here the Apostle Paul says, "Judge among yourselves." In other words, you tell me. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? It's talking about a public worship, because if she had her head uncovered in private, nobody would know it. Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her. For her hair is given to her for a what? A covering. And then he says, this applies to the church. He says, but if anyone seems to be contentious, in other words, if you don't like what I've said, we have no such custom of dissension, nor do what? The churches of God. Now, you know what some people say? We're nearing the end now. Some have argued that 1 Corinthians 11, 1 through 12, the apostle is simply enforcing a cultural custom that existed in his day, which is no longer obligatory, and therefore women do not need to obey his counsel. After all, are we to expect women to wear veils to church in the 21st century? Would not such a practice be considered odd and antiquated by today's standards? It bears noting that this custom of women wearing veils in public worship is not totally absent from the world culture today. It might be in the Western world. In some societies, it is still extant. I remember the time when Roman Catholic women in Latin America would never enter a church without a veil on their heads. And I see Lupe saying, yeah. Those who have been Roman Catholics and are from Latin America say, yeah, this is true. By the way, in some European countries, women cannot go into cathedrals as tourists unless they cover their heads. In Muslim countries, women still not only wear a veil, but they cover themselves so well that you can only see their eyes. I'm not saying that we should go to those extremes. Am I saying that women in Western society should embrace the custom of wearing veils when they come to church to worship? If I suggested such a thing, I would immediately be branded as guilty of fanaticism, which I've been accused of many times. I'm not suggesting that women in Western society must follow this custom. Customs may vary from culture to culture. And yet the foundational principle upon which the customs are built remain constant. So the question is, what is the principle that Paul wanted to teach in 1 Corinthians chapter 11? The head covering is the cultural manifestation, but there's a principle behind it. It has to do with authority structure. Let me give you an example. I once went to visit a church member, and this church member, I think I mentioned this before, had a pile of books on the table. The very bottom of the top pile of books was a Bible. And I was aggravated by that because the Bible's always supposed to be placed on top of all of the books. Right? That's the proper place for it to be. And so I was so bothered that in my regular diplomatic way, I said to this brother, I said, brother, you have the Bible under all of those books. Don't you know that the Bible's supposed to be on top? Because the Bible is above all knowledge. And he looked at me, he says, yeah, but the Bible is also the foundation of all knowledge. So who was right? Who was right? The way of manifesting the principle is different. But the principle of reverence for the Bible is the same. The principle of roles within marriage and the church have been established by God. The way of making this visible may vary from culture to culture, but the principle that God established of male headship or leadership, because headship is a bad word, according to many of these individuals, the principle of male headship and female submission is universal. And it existed in the Godhead before sin. Let me read in closing two statements from the Spirit of Prophecy. Ellen White would be stoned these days for these declarations. But she had it right and society has it wrong. The Lord has constituted the husband the head of the wife to be her protector. He is the house band of the family, binding the members together even as Christ is the head of the church and the Savior of the mystical body. Let every husband who claims to love God carefully study the requirements of God in his position. Christ's authority is exercised in wisdom, in all kindness and gentleness. So let the husband exercise his power and imitate the great head of the church. The Apostle Paul says, wives, be subject to your own husbands, but then he says, husbands, love your wives. If us husbands loved our wives the way God wanted us to love our wives, the wives would have no problem submitting to the authority of the husband. But the problem is that husbands have become little Napoleons. They think that I'm the head and I say what goes on around here. No. That's not what headship is about. That's the caricature that is given of it. They make complementarians look like that. Oh, they're anti-woman. They're male chauvinist pigs. They want to deprive women of their rights. That's the way that that's presented in the Theology of Ordination Committee. Even though time and again we repeat it. No, that's not our concept. We believe that men and women are equal. But God has established an authority structure like he has in the Godhead. The angels have a structure of authority. They have no problem with it, except for Lucifer. And you know what the end of the story of that is. There is no conflict between equality and submission. Bottom line. Second statement. The Health Reformer, June 1, 1873. Many mothers do not take half the interest in the constitutional wants of their children than the intelligent farmer shows to the brutes around him. What an indictment. And now she talks about women's rights. It is a woman's right to look after the interest of her husband, to have a care for his wardrobe, and to seek to make him happy. It is her right to improve her mind, now it talks about her mind and her manners, to be social, cheerful, and happy, shedding sunshine in her family, and making it a little heaven. and she may have an interest far more than me and mine, she should consider that society has claims upon her. Society is messed up because wives, mothers don't feel like society has claims on them. Society does. So did you understand what we studied today? Yes. Praise the Lord. Now this evening we're going to talk about God's pattern of leadership throughout the history of the world, even before sin. And so the next exciting episode will be this evening. Let's have a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we come before you to thank you for the clarity of your word and for the great light that has been shed upon it by the spirit of prophecy. Father, we now realize that this issue is far greater than just the relationships between men and women. It really has to do with the relationship between you and your Son in eternity. What an awesome thought. Father, I ask that you will help us to respect the structure that you have established. Help us not to consider submission as slavery. Help us to consider it a blessing. We ask, Lord, that you will be in a special way with all of the delegates to the General Conference session. All of us need to be continually praying for the delegates. Oh, Lord, help them to sit down and study these matters so that they can make an intelligent decision. A decision not based on culture or politics or after the fall, but a decision based on your holy word. I ask, Lord, that you will work upon their minds and hearts and that you will bless our leaders. We pray this in the precious name of Jesus. Amen.